Just want to be on record about Raquel's point about the code review process at Google. That's a sucky process. There's no reason to have to send code reviews to people you don't know and have never met in order to get their approval. Lots of places don't work like that. There's no evidence that it's actually better than talking to someone or pair programming with someone and doing your code review that way. So just one thing to say, like, don't accept horrible, crappy shit at work. You know, if I could have my slides up on the screen, that would be cool. I'm going to start off with a joke, which I've recently discovered is a dangerous thing to do. You know, I apologize in advance for the joke. After the joke, we'll move on to the much less controversial topic of diversity in tech. Where do mansplainers get their water? Does anyone know the answer to this? From a well, actually. Thank you very much. All that to say, it's a classic. I intend to use my well actually powers for good. You know, you probably have experienced people being like, well, let's discuss the controversy, or let me be devil's advocate for a moment. And you're probably like, oh, shit, not again. So I'm going to be, and you're like, if there's a study that shows this, or there's some data that shows this, I just don't have it to hand. So I'm going to try and put all the things you need to deal with those people in one place, and I'll, well, actually, to them so that you don't have to. That is the goal here. And if you're looking at this and you're like, I already know all this stuff, then for goodness sake, go into the hallway track. I won't mind at all. That's fine. In preparing for this, I thought the best thing to do would be to actually find out what people wanted to be able to well actually about. So I sent a tweet, and I got lots of good responses from people. I couldn't get to everyone because I only have 20 minutes, so I'm really sorry about that. Before I start with the responses and how I answer those questions, I just want to start by accepting that we actually have a problem in tech, because that's the first thing that a lot of people say is like, oh, we don't have a problem, you know. And perhaps the only good thing to come out of the last 2 years is the fact that we no longer believe that we're somehow in a post-racial society, or that, you know, the gender gap has been closed. Like, we can undeniably be clear that that is not the case. So yay, but it's because of all the terrible things that are happening, so boo. As with Alcoholics Anonymous or any intervention, first we have to realize that we do have a problem. Fortunately, there's lots of good data that shows us that we do have a problem. So Equal Opportunities Commission has lots of good data. Again, everything has links at the bottom so you can go and get this data for yourself. They did some research into, and the problem is the reports that this are based on, they're about, you know, it's about 2 years before they get filed and dealt with, so the data's lagging 3 years, but I assure you that there have not been significant changes in the last 3 years on any of these demographic measures. And what you can see is, and this is high tech as a whole, so this is things like aerospace as well. This is not just software. My belief is that the figures are worse in software based on the data we've seen from Tracy Cho and other people who've been good enough to send in diversity reports in tech. But what you can see is that, what a surprise, white men are overrepresented, black people are underrepresented, Hispanic and Latinx people are underrepresented. Asian Americans are overrepresented, but as Anne said, not in senior roles. There's this thing called the bamboo ceiling, and I don't have the data up here, but again, if you go and look at that report, you can see that Asian Americans are underrepresented in leadership roles. Black people, you know, it goes from 14% here to, in the general workforce, to like less than 1% in leadership roles in tech. It's really appalling. So we have a problem. We have a really big problem. We also have a problem in terms of men and women. Again, not just in technical roles, but also in management roles. And you can see here, the Tracy Cho's data and the diversity reports in general show about 20% women in engineering roles in the tech industry, and that's what the technician numbers are like here in the high-tech side. I think that slightly overestimates the number of women in engineering roles in tech. So we have a problem with demographics. We also have a problem with pay. So Hired.com recently put out a report, and this is up-to-date data. This is like right now. which shows that men are offered higher salaries than women for the same job at the same company 63% of the time, and those salaries are 4% higher, 4% less for women than for men for the same role at the same company. Often these reports are criticized because they're not comparing like for like. What Hire did, which is cool and which makes the data set interesting, is they actually looked at applicants for the same job and got their data reported back for the same job. So this is really good data. Women obviously know that they've been paid less than men. Obviously, as you would expect, men are surprised and shocked in higher numbers than women that this could possibly happen. Because, you know, to paraphrase Michelle Wolf, if a tree falls in a forest and a white man isn't there to see it, then how do we know it really happened? So San Francisco, interestingly, actually has the smallest gender wage gap compared to the industry as a whole, which is fascinating. I think Boston is the only city where you see women overrepresented in interviews. But again, you should go and look at the data set. It's really good. What's interesting is that the pay gaps represent expectation gaps. And what this suggests is that women are not asking for the same high salaries that men are. And this is a theme you'll see throughout the rest of this presentation, is men consistently overestimate their competence and their worth. And they are not punished for this. And that's a huge drawback of the system. And what you see is that people get what they ask, but they're not asking for what they're worth. And indeed, one of the other things that happens is that women and people of color punished for asking what they're worth. The other interesting thing is that product management is the best thing you can possibly go into, not just in terms of the amount of money you get paid. Product managers get the highest salaries, but also the gender gap is, in terms of salaries, is lower for product management. So we have a problem with representation, we have a problem with pay, we have a problem with promotion, people getting into leadership positions. So we have a problem. Why do we have a problem? So there's a couple of responses, which I'm sure you've all heard, is like, well, white guys are just better. So I immediately want to crush that particular misconception. There has been research done on this, particularly in pure math, which is one of the fields where we see the biggest disparity in gender and race in terms of representation. This is research that was done in 1990 that shows, and this is a bell curve. Bell curves are problematic for many reasons, but this actually shows that the difference between men and women is very, very small, 0.015 standard deviations. And crucially, the difference is getting lower over time, which tells you something important, which is that it's not biology which is driving this difference. It's social factors that are driving this difference. And that's important because people often say it's a biological difference. It's not. And we can actually measure that. When women go into exams and they're reminded of their gender before they take a maths exam, their results are lower. Just having them remember that they are a woman before taking a math exam will give them lower results. That's been shown in a psychological study. So, no significant difference. Wherever you draw the line for ability on this bell curve, you will get about 50-50 difference. And a more recent study that's done on school children shows that there's no difference whatsoever in ability. So we have, in fact, got better. And in fact, in some parts of the world, women actually do better in maths tests. They have higher levels of ability. So there's no difference in ability, either in gender or in race, and I don't have the numbers for race here, but the same effect applies because, you know, racial categories are socially constructed. So why would there be a biological cause for that? It doesn't make any sense. So there's no difference in ability. That can't explain the disparity. Anna Bake asks about this, or says this: senior technical women or minorities just don't currently exist. We can solve everything by getting more URM kids into tech. The pipeline problem. Oh wait, they quit. Maybe they just aren't that interested. I mean, maybe everything's totally neutral, there's a level playing field, that must be the problem. So there's two things going on here. Number one, why are there so women and people of color in senior positions? We'll come back to that. Number two, what about preference or interest? Maybe women just aren't interested in tech. So again, my data set for this that I really like actually looks at the people applying to take degrees in various different fields like healthcare, law, and so forth. And what we see is that as the decades increase from the mid-century onwards, we move towards 50% representation, except in computer science. where it peaked in the 70s and then started going down again. And there's a few hypotheses for that. There's a really good episode, I can't remember the podcast, it's an NPR podcast, Planet Money, thank you, where they talk about this, and their hypothesis on Planet Money is that it's because personal computers came out in the 80s and were marketed towards dudes, and so dudes got access to them, and when people got to college to take their CS degrees, the dudes were like, oh yeah, I can do this, and the women were like, what the hell is this? And they were like, well, obviously I'm no good at it, so I'm not going to do it anymore. And so again, social factors caused this. It wasn't that women were less interested, it was that men had got all this sneaky mentoring on the side and were thus better prepared to actually do the job. And I know you all know the history of this, but I'm going to say it anyway because we can't say this enough. It's impossible to overemphasize the extent to which, at the beginning of computer science, women were at the forefront. This is a picture of ENIAC, the first programmable computer. When these photos were discovered a few years ago, these women, people thought, oh, well, people thought they were models in front of the computers rather than what they actually were, which is the women who programmed the ENIAC and in fact had to learn how to program because it had never been done before. So it was the first programmers at all were women. Obviously, we've got to talk about Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, Navy reservist who joined the Eckhard-Mortley Computer Corporation, developing the UNIVAC, one of the first commercially successful computers, developed the compiler, worked on Codicil, which became COBOL. She has this fabulous quote, which Kat's already quoted today. We've got to talk about these amazing women, Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, NASA's first woman engineer. Vaughan went on to become an expert Fortran programmer. John Glenn, who was on the Mercury program, orbiting around the Earth, before he went up on that capsule, he specifically asked for Johnson's measurements and refused to fly unless she verified the calculations that the computer came up with. So these are all African-American women trailblazing in a time and place that had many, many obstacles I can't even begin to imagine. If you haven't seen Hidden Figures, I'm sure you all have, but go and watch it again because it's awesome. I want to talk about Margaret Hamilton, director of software engineering at MIT, who designed or led the team that developed the software for the lunar lander and the Apollo missions, invented basically software management and software engineering. So there's not a problem with interest, there's not a problem with ability. What could it be? It's bias. There's a great paper, How Stereotypes Impair Women's Career in Science. So this guy did an experiment. There's lots of good experiments in social sciences on this. This is a good paper. It shows that men are twice as likely to be hired for a mathematical task than a woman. If ability is self-reported, like if you say, I'm really good at this, women are still discriminated against because employers do not fully account for men's tendency to boast about their performance. So it turns out men don't get punished for boasting, oddly. There's also a great study that was done where they took a bunch of resumes and either put a woman's or a man's name at the top and then gave them to professors in order to evaluate whether they should hire them to become lab assistants. So what it showed is if you put a woman's name at the top, people were rated as being less competent, less hireable, and that they would be given less mentoring and that they would be paid less. And what's especially depressing about this is that both male and women professors did the same thing. These biases are pervasive and we all internalize them. There's a little bit of James Damore in all of us. All of us share these biases. It's really problematic. But they're there, and they act all the way through our lives, and that effect is compounding, which is why we are where we are right now. There's another really great study that was done by Sarah Jane Leslie, published in Science in 2016, where she examined 4 hypotheses that correlate with a percentage of women in various fields. So these are scientific fields. Hang on. My counter isn't working, so I don't know how long I've been talking for. Kat, can you just tell me when I've got 5 minutes left? Thanks. So she looked at various fields in engineering and the arts in academia and looked at the percentage of women in those fields and examined 4 hypotheses to try and find which hypotheses would correlate with the percentage of women in that field. So she looked at gender differences in willingness or ability to work long hours, gender differences in the high end of the aptitude distribution. And then this is something that people often talk about, that women tend to be more empathetic rather than systematizing. This is apparently a personality trait, although the extent to which this is biologically determined is, let's say, at best questionable, because, you know, if you were in a field where you were constantly questioned, perhaps you would put more weight on empathizing than systematizing. Weird. So she looked at the extent to which a particular discipline required systematizing rather than empathizing, and then 4, the extent to which practitioners believe that raw innate talent is the main requirement for success. And what she found was there's no correlation between the first 3 hypotheses and the percentage of women in the field. What correlates is actually the 4th one, the extent to which people believe that innate talent is required for success. So what you find is that this bias combines with the bias that women and people of color are less capable, and that's the problem. So it's our beliefs. It's our beliefs about people and our stereotypes about people that cause the problem, not anything to do with people's ability or preferences or any of these other factors. So lots of great evidence that shows that that's the case. So anytime someone comes to you and says, oh, it's this fact, it's biology, it's blah, 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 here's a bunch of great papers, you can be like, no, dude, it's your fault. Cut that shit out. So here's Teresa Bajasa, who I used to work with. She's awesome. And sorry, I'm getting this up on my display here because otherwise I'm a bit blind because I'm old. Here's number 1. Sample, real technic women are tomboys. I'm feminine, wear makeup, heels, sociable, fashionable, like my door open for me and do math or tech for fun. Yeah, who knew? People who have different ideas about who they are can also program computers. To solve the diversity problem, we need to get minorities interested in STEAM and then fill the skill gap. It seems the problem is interest and lack of education. We talked about that. We're here and we have mad skills, but one look and you assume we can't possibly be good enough. It's also like saying there's a D&I problem. The solution must be to change you. The real solution is to change the behavior of the majority, not that of the minorities, which, spot on. So I want to talk about this and this picture that we have in our heads of what a technical person is like. You know, if you Google hacker, you see this, you know, all the representations of hackers in popular media and movies is like some really antisocial dude with no dress sense who probably sits in a dark room all day long and doesn't eat properly and, you know, so this is socially constructed. This has nothing to do with this. There's no correlation with ability to actually be good at computer programming. And it's constructed on purpose. These stereotypes were developed in the 70s in order to select people that people thought would be good at programming computers. So based on a series of preference questions, these tests sought to identify job applicants who were the ideal programming type. Successful programmers displayed disinterest in people, and they disliked activities involving close personal interaction, which is why Google has a code review tool. So, you know, it's almost as if someone said, we really need white men to get these prestigious and highly paid job. How can we select for proper, let's consult our book of stereotypes and find how we can make sure we only get white dudes. And anyone who's actually programmed in real life, who's a manager in this room? Okay, what's your biggest problem? Is it tech or is it people? It's people. Guess what? If you need to build computer software, you need people to like talk to each other and work in teams and communicate effectively. And so if you select for people who can't do that, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of people who are really annoying to manage and can't get stuff done if it involves them actually working with other people to get that done, and they can't just sit in their room for days and days on end programming to get it. Sorry, you need this skill over here, but I don't have it. Maybe I should work out a way to develop it in my own time. Or you could talk to that. So, you know, we've constructed this thing. It's stupid. It's exactly what you don't want. Like that person on your team is going to, and the ability to walk apparently is useful, who knew? That person on your team is going to destroy your team. We don't want those people. When I interview, I select out for this trait because I don't want these people on my team because they're poison. Like there is something which does explain the lack of people of women and people in color in tech, and it's having to work with these people. That's the problem. So let's select out and not have this act as a gatekeeper. Another good paper, Computer Science and Engineering are stereotypes in modern American culture as male-oriented fields that involve social isolation and intense focus on machinery and inborn brilliance. So this is bullshit. We gotta stop it. We shouldn't set a target for candidates or speakers. There just aren't that many out there, and we don't want to lower the bar. I'm a diversity hire, and therefore I'm not here on my own merit. It's the new affirmative action. So, unfortunately, we're in a society where everything is zero-sum. We have all this zero-sum thinking. I just want to be really clear about this. Increasing representation doesn't mean lowering the bar. It means putting more work into finding suitably qualified candidates. If the candidate pool is bigger than the number of people you need, you get more selective. It's just math. I'm terrible at art. I apologize for this diagram. But, assuming you have a group of people, really bad. I should never go into drawing. My 6-year-old consistently outdraws me. I should have got her to do this. If this is a normal distribution of skill, and there's dudes and there's women, but there's less women than dudes, and you actually only need 5 people on your team, the candidate pool is much bigger. And the reason that you're getting all these dudes is because you're not actually going out and finding the qualified women. And the same applies to people of color. So people there's no women applying. Go out and find them, you lazy, right? Oh, sorry, am I cutting into your looking for cat gifts on the internet when your job is to find more people who are qualified? Oh, sorry, maybe you should do your job. So Martin Fowler has this good blog post, Diversity Mediocrity Illusion. Setting targets is good. Setting targets is what encourages people to go out and do the work. That doesn't mean lowering the bar. It's completely independent. You shouldn't lower the bar. You should put more work into finding the right people. There's another piece of research that came out in HBR a couple of years ago that shows that if there's only one woman in your candidate pool, they will not get hired. Statistically, it's impossible. If you want to increase the representation of a particular group, you have to have at least 2 of them in the hiring pool. So that means making sure that you set targets for the number of people in the pool. And also, when you're hiring for internal leadership positions, making sure that you have an interview process. You don't just go and I picked Jez because he's very confident, he'll make a good leader. No, actually have an open competition and make sure there's representation in that hiring pool. Otherwise, you're only going to end up with white dudes in leadership positions, which is exactly what happens. The idea that we're just going to solve the problem by hiring people, that's a problem. We need to fix our environment. Again, another piece of research that was done shows that over time, over half of qualified women working in science, engineering, and technology quit their jobs. 2013, 26% of computing jobs in the US were held by women, down from 25% in 1990, 35% in 1990. And although 80% of women working in STEM say they love their job, 32% also say they feel stalled and are likely to quit. Again, there was some research done in HBR that shows what's pushing women out of tech, primarily having to provide more evidence that they're qualified than men do, because men overemphasize or basically lie about their superior abilities. The pressure to conform to stereotypical roles, being supported by other people, or this is my personal unfavorite, being mistaken for administrative or custodial staff. So I'm just going to end by talking about what we can do about this. We've got to stop perpetuating these stereotypes about, brilliant individuals being the cause of our success or being the best people at tech, and focus on instead building great teams and teamwork being more important than someone sitting in a room for days on end trying to get some code working. Creating an inclusive environment. This is one thing where management and leadership play a really important role, and other white dudes. If someone's like, let's talk about the controversy, or let's play devil's advocate. No, let's not. This has all been disproved for many years, and here's a whole bunch of research which shows that it's totally false. Why are you repeating bullshit ideas that have been disproven for many years? That's just being dumb. Promote more women and people of color. There's a hack to the fact that women get penalized for talking about their abilities. You can talk about other people's abilities, and you won't get punished for that. So once you get into a position of power and influence, you can advocate for other people, and you won't get punished for that. So that's a really great hack. So promote, and I spent my whole career seeing people, like white guys, get promoted, even though they don't have the skills, because they demonstrate confidence. And women are consistently told, well, next year, you're not quite there yet. Next year, you'd be great. So let's not do that. Let's take chances on people who are not white guys. They may fail. That's okay. White guys fail all the time. So let's give them another chance, and maybe give some more resources and time into helping those people. Actually gather data, make sure that you're doing the right thing, and if you're not, fix it. My final comment on this, people are like, when will we be done with this? And I want to echo what was said earlier. We'll be done when there's an equal distribution of power and wealth across genders, races, abilities, and sexual orientation. This just wants to go to the end. It's not time yet. Thanks very much to all these people who've helped me along the way. Particularly big shout out to Catherine, her team, Sonia, everyone else. Thanks very much for your time.